certain recommendation was going to give you that, then you would just take it off the table.
Right.
But again, I don't think it's a matter so much of which policy is going to help the poor or not. I don't think you help people by having the government plunge deeper into debt and stifling economic growth.
Yeah.
The one thing I would say that the problem is that your economy is so intricately tied to the U.S. economy.
No,
so if I'm writing my predictions about the U.S. being awful and the banking sector being awful, you guys being so dependent on tourism and financial services. So it's, I don't have a silver bullet to give you, except just to try to say that I think people should be prepared for the fact that the U.S., in my opinion, is not about to turn the corner.
I hear you. The WTO is just sitting out there everywhere they have a meeting. The people seem to take off on them and do protests of the most massive kind, sometimes very violent. And it is trying to be a kind of world policeman in terms of trading, so on. This region was being considered for a free trade area of the Americas. That has kind of been on hold a little bit. Europe, of course, has gotten more strong in terms of the European Union. We have got here in the Caribbean a certain Caribbean single market and economy. So there seems to be an emphasis of an ebb and flow on economic trading blocks. What is the future of those?
Well, I think the future is not that I endorse this pattern, but I think you're going to see these large regional aggregations, and it's sort of building up powerhouses, like you say, the European Union and NAFTA and other places. But the irony is, I'm a believer in actual free trade, but there you don't need to have all these intricate political agreements. If the U.S. wants to have free trade, then they would just say, okay, we won't tax products that come from abroad. And it would, it would just be a one-line piece of paper, and that's all you would need. But instead, like NAFTA was this huge document, I think over 1,000 pages. And so, that sort of shows you that these things really aren't about free trade per se. It's more like managed trade. And, when the swine flu broke out, had all these different people saying, oh, we don't want to have pork products from this country. And so, the politicians are always looking at ways to protect their domestic industries, even though they've signed these so-called free trade agreements. So it's hard to analyze because they're not really what they say they are.
Yeah. We're here talking with Dr. Robert Murphy, who is an economist. He is a research fellow at the Pacific Research Institute, and I believe that's where?
Oh, that's in California.
In California. And you live where?
I live in Nashville, Tennessee.
I hope you're not commuting to California every 2 months and 3 months. What is your emphasis at the Pacific Research Institute?
Well, there I'm mostly focused on fiscal matters, and I'm writing documents to try to get the California state government to reform their tax system, basically, because they, as you may know, they have a huge deficit right now that they're dealing with.
They're broke.
Exactly.
They're going to have to cut services.
Right, they have to cut services, cut their spending.
Mm-hmm. Are they going to get out of it? California is about, the fourth largest country in the world, fifth largest country in the world?
Yeah, I think in terms of economies, if it were its own, it would be the 9th biggest economy in the world. You're right.
Is Mr. Schwarzenegger going to pull that together? I know it's not his problem, but is he going to pull it together? Because the buck stops with him.
I don't think he's going to, because it's just the political climate there. They're always looking to tighten the screws more on people who right now pay the taxes. And, just perversely, the more you increase the taxes on those people, they're just going to leave the state. And so that's part of my research to show them, and I went and testified to the people there saying that, whether or not you think it's fair, if you increase taxes more on the 1% that are paying whatever it is, 60% of the taxes, they're just going to move to Arizona or some other state and put their business there. Mm-hmm. And so in the long run, you're just going to, you're going to bring in less revenue.
So how do you fix a problem like that? You're giving advice to Jeffrey Lloyd, governor of California, and you've got this serious problem, declining revenues potentially. You certainly got more expenditure. People expecting more services, but you can't provide them. In fact, you got to find ways to cut them because you got to balance a budget. Otherwise, you're going to be in some serious trouble. What do you say to a governor of that state?
Well, the obvious thing you do is you look through the budget and you try to find stuff that's just ridiculous to get rid of. But there's only so much of that. Most things that are in the budget there, somebody likes that money and they're going to raise a fuss if you want to cut it.
Right.
So one thing to do is to look at things that you could privatize. That the state owns a lot of resources, things that it administers. And so if you sold those off to the private sector, that's one way to raise money relatively painlessly. Mm-hmm. And of course, there's all sorts of objections to there. But the point is, what they're doing now, they can't. It's unsustainable. They got to do something.
Yeah, we depend on tourism, as you indicated, and there is a sector of the American public that will travel no matter what. People like Robert Murphy, who has got unlimited cash, stashed out somewhere will not necessarily go to Dubai or maybe, you know, Dominican Republic, but you'll come to the Bahamas for a weekend. When do you see that discretionary spending returning in the United States? Even though the picture may not be as rosy as it once was or people would like for it to be, but when do you think that people say, man, oh, shucks, man, I was only one life to live. I'm going to go out to dinner. I'm not going to do it every week like I used to, but I'm going to go out to dinner. I'm going to take that power weekend trip to the Bahamas.
I think it's probably possible that by the end of this year, this initial panic will be over. Because I think part of what's happening is right now, American households are really cutting back, trying to live well below their means to replenish their savings. Because what happened is, in a sense, they thought they were saving all through the housing boom years because their portfolios were going up and their house price were going up. And so now I think to compensate for that, they're working extra jobs if they can find them, and they're cutting back. But at some point, I think you're right. They're going to realize we're not going to live under this austerity budget forever. And those people who have jobs, and still obviously many people still have jobs, they're going to, let's say by the end of this year, I think we'll realize, okay, the emergency's over. Let's start going back and living it up a little bit.
Doctor, how much do economists like you contribute to the problem of a recession or slowdown? For instance, I kind of believe that mostly it's people talking these things. Somebody is going to say, you know, well, we've had 6 or 7 years of boom now. I'm sure that there's going to be a recession sometime soon. And another person says, boy, I heard Dr. Murphy on the radio says a recession is coming. And I called Damien and I said, Damien, you better start saving your money and don't buy that big ticket item because a recession is coming. And before you know it, everybody's talking about a recession. There's no statistical data to support that a recession is coming, but there is a loss of confidence. So how much do people like you create recessions and create recoveries?
Well, I agree with you that economists share a big portion of the blame, but the mechanism, I think, is because they advise governments and give them bad policy recommendations. So I don't think it's so much a matter of abstract confidence that I think I do believe that there are such things as fundamentals, and that the American economy, you know, the fundamentals really were unsustainable, and so you were going to have a bust. So it wasn't mere psychology that got us into this mess. But what's made the mess so much worse, in my opinion, is these horrible recommendations coming from Nobel Prize-winning economists.
So you don't have much confidence in those who advise a Barack Obama or an Angela Merkel or Mr. John, whatever his name is, in London. You don't think that these are people who really have got their pulse on the realities of the world, looking forward 10 years, 30 years, 50 years down the road. You just think that they're eggheads and maybe nerds, and they've never met a payroll in their life and probably can't tell you how to run an economy.
I do think that's true, and there's also, I mean, it's not that they're consciously saying things that are wrong. I think that they sincerely believe in their advice, but maybe this is too cynical, but I think governments, of course, are going to gravitate and grab intellectuals who espouse recommendations that give the government an excuse to spend a lot of money. Because if you're in power, obviously it's better for you to be able to spend trillions of dollars than to listen to me and say, well, I want you to do nothing. That's no fun. What's the point of being president if you're going to do nothing?
Tell me, in terms of their outlook, looking at our people around President Obama right now, we've got Ben Bernanke, Federal Reserve. We've got Tim Geithner. He's the Treasury Secretary. We've got Larry Summers. He's somebody somewhere in the House there dealing, not in the House, in his inner circle. So you've got experienced people. Ben Bernanke has been around in Washington for a little bit. He's got a PhD. He seems to be somebody who knows what he's doing. He's got Tim Geithner there. Tim has been around a little bit, Treasury Secretary. You've got the fellow who was the chief of staff in the White House there. I can't remember his name, but he was a congressman, and he almost went back to being a congressman. So these guys are smart guys. Are you satisfied that they have around the President of the United States the people that can make this thing work for the next 150 years?
No, I'm not satisfied because, for example, Tim Geithner is a great example. He was head of the New York Fed when all this TARP money and so forth happened. So, I mean, it's true he's experienced and he's been around, but he's been around and he understands how this disaster occurred, and because he was there partly at the helm when it did occur. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with Ben Bernanke. Again, is academically he's written a lot on the Great Depression, but in my mind,